Hello and welcome to another video review. This is Half-Life 2 Episode 2 for PC, Mac, Xbox 360, and PlayStation 3. Now, after the lukewarm Episode 1, I was really not expecting too much from Valve in Episode 2, because, they didn't really know what they were doing with the episodic content, and I was kind of worried about it. But this was released in the orange box along with Portal and Team Fortress 2, so it really was considered kind of a side game as opposed to a full release. So instead of actually being released as a full standalone game to begin with, it was originally only available in that orange box, and eventually they did make it a standalone game, and for a reduced price. It was, I believe, $10. It might be $5 now or something like that. It's pretty cheap now. So I can kind of review this more as kind of an episodic content, maybe even a DLC, than an actual game. But does it really feel like an episodic content or a DLC? Well, we'll talk about that in a minute. Now, despite improving the engine to orange box level of Source Engine, they really didn't change a whole lot with the presentation of this, because they knew that Half-Life 2 and Episode 1 both had great presentation. So what they did instead was they actually added in features specific to the orange box engine, like higher res textures that you can put on the very high setting. They updated the shaders, the reflections, stuff like that. The lighting was improved quite a bit, actually. And so overall, the presentation is more of that Half-Life 2 awesomeness with an orange box twist. So it's higher fidelity than the previous two titles in the series. Well, previous two Half-Life 2 games. That's kind of weird, but anyway, higher fidelity than those. But at the same time, it looks pretty much the same, and the same with the sound design. It's pretty much the same as it was in those previous two games. But the music is a little more fitting this time around, at least to me. It's not any more memorable. It just fits the game better for some odd reason. Much more atmospheric, and when there's the action-packed moments, it really does pick up to that action-packed music level. So, and this time it actually transitions fairly decently, as opposed to just going crazy action sequence, instant mood music. It's like, But no, it actually kind of slowly fades out, and then you have a period of silence for a while, then it goes back into the mood music event when you enter the appropriate area. So, presentation is pretty much the same as the previous two games, but with slight improvements here and there. Now, if you missed out on Episode 1, don't worry about it. They actually recap the story of Episode 1 at the very beginning of Episode 2. Basically, the Cliff Notes version goes through a cutscene before you start the game. Basically, it tells you what happened after the events of Half-Life 2, up until where you are now, and then it goes right into where you are now, and keeps going. Now, things to note about this game's storyline. First off, it is a longer game than Episode 1. That is definite. It's actually almost the length of a full-sized first-person shooter campaign this time around, which is really, really appreciated. Episode 1 was really short, really easy, and had basically no depth to the storyline whatsoever. And so, that's kind of nice. Now, granted, Episode 2 is not long by any means. It's still shorter than Half-Life 2, but it's closer to the length of an actual game, as opposed to just like almost like a DLC package or something like that. Now, the story, much better written than Episode 1, pretty much on par with Half-Life 2 base. And to be honest with you, it actually feels more Half-Life-y. It leaves you with way more questions than you have answers. You sit there and you're going, wait, what's this? And how does this tie into this? Because there's certain things like Portal ties into this game somehow. We really don't know how yet, but somehow Portal ties into it. And so that's going to be interesting to see how that turns out. Because we didn't see any of that in Portal 2, if I've heard correctly. I haven't played Portal 2 yet, but I don't know if there's anything in there tying it to Half-Life 2 Episode 2 or Episode 3 or whatever. The ending is a very large cliffhanger. It leaves you sitting there going, okay, give me Episode 3 now. And that's why a lot of people are really pissed off with Valve right now for not releasing Episode 3, because they left us on such a cliffhanger that it's going to be really hard to bring it back up and say, okay, sorry about that, here's Episode 3. They're just not going to be able to just get away with it this time. I mean, because, what happens, Especially considering we had a lot more character development with Alex in this game. Both as just your kind of sidekick character who becomes a lot more capable in this game due to both AI enhancements and stuff like that. As well as the writing itself. I mean, she plays a much more vital role to the storyline than she did in Episode 1 even. So that's pretty appreciated. It was really nice to see her develop as a character, and I really want to see more character development as we go on. They introduced new characters. They left some old characters, even had a cliffhanger with them tying in from Episode 1, and we still don't know what happened to them. So we really want to see how this all ties together and what ends up happening in Episode 3, and we don't have it yet. Anyway, while the story is better written, better paced, there's a lot more development into it, and it does feel a lot more Half-Life-y. I mean, there's certain things in there, especially like the G-Man's meddling. I mean, he gets involved in this and you're like, oh, you little bastard, and stuff like that. And so, while it does all that, the gameplay is its major problem. First off, they added in a new enemy. Well, actually, a couple new enemies. The first one that you encounter is the acid-spitting antlions. Yes, acid-spitting antlions. And they are extremely annoying, because they take a lot of damage. And in the early game, your ammo is actually very limited. So, when you're fighting these things, it's actually pretty hard, and that's one thing they also did very well. They upped the difficulty very considerably from Half-Life 2 and Episode 1. They massively upped it. I played through this on normal and actually still had quite a bit of difficulty with it. So, that should tell you something right there. The other enemy they added was the Hunter, which is another Combine thing, and it's basically... think of a Strider, only a lot smaller, a lot faster, fires a bunch of exploding flechettes, and it also charges you. And so they're pretty problematic. I mean, they're really hard to take down. But when you do actually take them down, it's pretty satisfying. Another thing they did with the gameplay was add in achievements. And to be honest with you, when I went through this game to begin with, I was actually trying to do as many achievements as I possibly could. I ended up only having 3 left that I wasn't able to finish. One of them I had just no idea what to do. One of them is ridiculously difficult, and the other one is just, you had to find a bunch of stuff, and it's like, whatever. So, I had a lot of problems with that. But really, it's the gameplay that lets it down. Despite the improvements, they didn't really add any... Like in Episode 1, they didn't really add anything new to, say, your weapons. They added a new thing to play with your gravity gun with. But other than that, they really didn't do a lot. It's not like you can just pull, say, a mounted gun off and then use that as, a machine gun or something. You can't do stuff like that. It'd be nice, but you can't. And so it does feel like just kind of another episode pack. And I was like, whatever. But it's really the end game that becomes problematic, because then that's when they really start throwing a lot of stuff at you. The game's difficult to begin with, but then you get to the end, and it's even more difficult, and it's really just frustrating more than anything else. So overall, you have a pretty good Half-Life 2 episode here, but in general, by the time you get to the end, you're just really frustrated with it. And it's not that the game itself is bad or anything. It's just that they made it... They almost went too far with the difficulty. That's the problem with it. The difficulty spike between Half-Life 2 Episode 1 and Episode 2 is pretty enormous, really. First off, your weapons do a lot less damage. Even the gravity gun, which is kind of surprising. There's a lot more enemies being thrown at you at once. And the enemies themselves are tougher. They do more damage. They, in a lot of ways, they're also faster, and they swarm you a lot more. And your ammo is generally very limited until the middle to the end of the game. So by that time, I mean, even then, having tons of ammo really doesn't help you all that much. So really, the main problems with the game lie in the difficulty, and especially the end game level. I mean, that thing is, oh, it's evil. It's pure evil. I mean, that's all I have to say. At least with the achievement, I was trying to get the achievement, and it was just pure evil, because it's like, oh, you have to do this without getting any of this, any harm coming to this. And it's like, why are you so evil, Valve? But anyway, so there really is there's still the problem of not having a lot of replay value with this one. I mean, you play through it once, and unless you really like the story, because I mean, there's several parts in this game that really irritated me, and I really can't see myself playing through it again, except maybe for a Let's Play. But I mean, I'm not going to just jump back into this anytime soon and just go through it and say, yeah, I like this game. No, it's still pretty good. It's just that it's really frustrating, and ultimately, I can't really give it a great score for that. But it's not Episode 1 either. It's not quite that level of mediocrity. So, overall, I give it a 3 out of 5. And thanks for watching.